Today at the National Press Club, the Minister for Homelessness, Brendan O'Connor. Mr O'Connor will discuss the government's target to halve the number of people without a home by 2020, where it's at, and the challenges governments face reaching the goal. From the National Press Club in Canberra, Brendan O'Connor.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the National Press Club for today's National Australia Bank address. Homelessness remains a major problem in Australia, despite more than $1 billion being committed to address the problem back in 2009 under the National Partnership Agreement on Homelessness between the Commonwealth and the States. The number of homeless people has actually risen in that period. According to the 2011 census, more than 105,000 people at that point lacked any form of adequate accommodation. Families, women, men and children, in fact one-third are under the age of 19. One-third of the homeless in this country are under the age of 19, and a significant proportion, around 12%, are actually themselves under 12. With the national agreement due to expire next year and the obvious pressure on state and federal budgets, the question is what happens next? So to discuss that, please welcome the Minister for Housing and Homelessness, Brendan O'Connor.
Well, thank you very much. Can I firstly acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet and pay my respects to their elders, both past and present. I'd like to also acknowledge Laurie Wilson, President of the National Press Club, and of course other distinguished guests, members of the Press Club. It is some 23 years, a generation, since the release of the Burdekin report on youth homelessness. And the stories within spoke of a silent national tragedy. These stories had nothing in common with the jubilant optimism of the previous year's bicentenary. The stories of loss of dignity and of young lives wasted and destroyed simply could not be ignored. To do so would be shameful. And yet for 19 years, successive government responses failed to grasp Burdekin's central message that we can't simply support people in homelessness, but instead support people through homelessness. When this Labor government was elected, there were too many Australians homeless. Enough Australians to fill the MCG, lacking the most basic of needs, a stable roof over their heads. Burdekin's challenge could not be ignored in this, one of the world's richest countries, for yet another generation. We saw that there was too little recognition that we needed to focus on preventing homelessness in the first place, or that we could address homelessness through early and targeted intervention or through programs that would break the debilitating and often self-perpetuating cycle of homelessness. These critical aims require complex and integrated policy responses, but above all, they require partnerships. No single government and no single agency can solve this problem. My central message today is a simple one. Without a long-term cooperative partnership between governments, the not-for-profit and the corporate sectors, we will fail in our policy response to homelessness. From homelessness flows alienation from family, from community and from the economy. From homelessness flows a lack of education and employment, ill health and a lack of security. That lack of opportunity tears at our social fabric and ripples out to affect us all. But Labor recognised we needed to do more than just put a roof over people's heads. We needed to help people through the problems that led them to being homeless in the first place. Better still, we needed to prevent homelessness happening at all. Our response was to make reducing homelessness a national priority. In 2008, we set out our plan in a white paper entitled The Road Home. When we looked at homelessness, we saw its many faces. We saw the rough sleepers. We saw a woman and her child running into the night to escape a beating. We saw an abused teenager. We saw the family whose rental accommodation had run out and who had nowhere to go. And we saw a number of often interrelated causes of homelessness: family breakdown, mental illness, substance abuse, gambling addiction, or more simply, but no less stressful, nowhere you can afford to live. Too often we saw intergenerational disadvantage. Too often we saw traumatic life-changing event from which very few of us in this country are immune. Above all, we saw a compelling need to embark upon long-term partnerships with the states and the community and private sector. We knew in 2008 that this would be a long journey that went well beyond the brief time frame of an election cycle. We knew that there'd be no simple fix. But above all, we knew that unless we worked together in a long-term collaborative partnership, we would struggle to complete the journey. We set targets that were ambitious, and we don't shy away from that. We committed to halve the rate of homelessness in Australia by 2020 and to provide supported accommodation to all rough sleepers who seek it. This week's release of homelessness figures by the Australian Bureau of Statistics paints a complex picture. The figures illustrate both our achievements to date and the challenges we face into the future. The headline figure shows an increase in the rate of homelessness of 8%, and of course that is disappointing. But a more in-depth analysis reveals some promising signs. The rate of rough sleeping has fallen by 13.5%. This is encouraging, particularly as the data relates to only the first 2 years of the government's intensified policy response. Across the spectrum of homelessness issues, sleeping rough has the most debilitating health, social and educational outcomes. It is perhaps the hardest issue to address. These people are truly our most vulnerable citizens, and I'm proud that we're making real progress in addressing one of the core concerns outlined by the White Paper. The number of people in supported accommodation has risen by 23%. This demonstrates that there is greater access to this important transitional accommodation. Clearly, our provision of services here is responding better to the needs of people struggling to maintain secure and stable housing. By accessing support services while in accommodation, we're giving people a chance to break out of the cycle of homelessness. The rate of Indigenous homelessness has fallen by 14.5%. That is by no means eliminating the outcomes gap between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians, but it is closing the gap, and I'm happy we're moving in the right direction. And we must remember this, that this data reflects what the position was on the 9th of August last year, some 14 months ago, and I can tell you it has improved since then. The biggest increase in homelessness came from people, some 41,000, living in severely overcrowded conditions. This group of people represents an estimated 40% of Australia's homelessness population as of August last year. It's no good to be living in severely overcrowded accommodation, but I think we can all agree generally it's a whole lot better than sleeping on the streets. Ensuring access to affordable housing may be the greatest help we can provide to people in this situation. And the government's commitment to the provision of affordable housing is unprecedented in modern times. We know that being without a home is not just the result of too few houses, but supply of social housing is a very important part of the jigsaw. Nobody can get back on their feet and stay there without safe and appropriate housing. We've invested $6 billion in social housing. We've built 21,000 new social housing homes and refurbished another 80,000. I'm proud as Minister to say that 10,000 people who might otherwise have been homeless are now living in these homes. That's 10,000 lives. That's 10,000 stories of recovery, opportunity and promise. Further, nearly 11,000 homes have been built under the National Rental Affordability Scheme, with another 40,000 to come. These homes are available to rent by people on low and moderate incomes at 20% below the market rent. Many of those people are, on occasion, at the precipice of homelessness. Since 2008, the Labor government has made a direct financial contribution to 1 in every 20 homes built in this country. That is part of a $20 billion federal investment in housing and homeless services since coming to office. Seen in its totality, this is a nation-building and nation-changing investment. These figures demonstrate the federal government's fundamental commitment to providing a platform for people where they, their families and their children can resume a meaningful life in civil society. This investment also reflects the government's commitment to expanding the opportunities to Australians on low and modest incomes to access affordable housing through the National Affordability Housing Agreement. And it reflects the government's understanding of the relationship between housing and homelessness. But the White Paper also acknowledged that our shared journey was about so much more than housing. If we were going to achieve real transformative change, we needed to focus on prevention, early intervention and a strong, timely and integrated service response when people need help, as well as programs that seek to break people out of the cycle of homelessness. The White Paper also made it clear we needed more information to develop evidence-based policy responses. ABS estimates are important, but we will also use more dynamic and timely data collected by the Institute of Health and Welfare from specialist homelessness services. The federal government is also funding the National Homelessness Research Agenda to better understand why people are becoming homeless in the first place and how successful they are in moving out of it. We're working to piece together the puzzle through research, service delivery evaluation and policy development. Let me give you just one example. Journeys Home is assessing income support recipients who are homeless, at risk of or vulnerable to homelessness. Early findings suggest that many respondents churn in and out of homelessness over their lifetime and are often in unstable housing situations. Many of these people experience homelessness at an early age, and that is an indicator of persistent homelessness. The most common reason for first becoming homeless was the family breakdown or indeed conflict in the family home. That means that responses to and the prevention of domestic and family violence should continue to be an important focus of our work. As everyone here knows, intervening early can prevent homelessness. Early intervention and effective services are core to our approach, but they must be based on coherent, evidence-based policy. This is why our need to engage with states about lessons learnt is so very important. We cannot do this by ourselves. We need clarity about what the states are doing with the Commonwealth taxpayers' contribution to housing, to homelessness and housing. We need to know whether the services they're investing in are delivering, whether the reforms they're undertaking are working. And we need to make sure that the states are not resiling from their commitments. That is a reasonable and objective foundation for any cooperative relationship. And yet, in response to my request to state colleagues from such information, New South Wales, Queensland, Victoria and Western Australia have refused, taking cover behind the black letter of their agreements with the Commonwealth. However, the request cannot be unreasonable. South Australia, Tasmania, the ACT have indicated they're more than happy to provide such information. Let's be clear on one thing. There's no point in the federal government putting money in if the state governments are taking it out. So in future, I want to inject more accountability and transparency into all our Commonwealth state agreements. The public is owed an explanation of where the states are spending taxpayers' dollars. We need open and transparent relationships with the state and territory governments. We need to work with businesses and with all the organisations that work to prevent people becoming homeless, that support the homeless in finding accommodation and that provide housing to the homeless. Now, I wish I could come here today to say that the spirit of cooperation underpinning our partnerships with the states on housing and on homelessness remained undiminished. There are, however, some concerning roadblocks ahead. To be frank, we're seeing a succession of state governments appearing to step back gradually from that cooperation. The National Partnership Agreement on Homelessness illustrates the two sides of this story. It is both a testament to what we can achieve when we are united, and it shows also the difficulties ahead when we're divided. The Homelessness Partnership represented another unprecedented funding commitment of $1.1 billion over 4.5 years. It has meant hundreds of new or expanded services which are delivered across the nation. and it is in addition to any spending on homelessness services as part of the $1.3 billion a year the Commonwealth provides to the states for affordable housing. As part of the partnership, more than 500 supported accommodation homes have been built, and under the A Place to Call Home initiative, with another 100 on the way. As part of this program, people receive permanent housing as well as tenancy and other support services for 12 months to help them through and help them address their underlying issues that led to their homelessness. They're also supported to reintegrate with the broader community. As Minister, I have had the privilege of speaking with many of the people whose lives have been simply transformed by this partnership with the states. To those state governments that choose not to provide the information I requested, I say simply this: look at the people whose lives are improved when we genuinely work together. Today I challenge us all not to portray those who are trusting us to act in their interests. The groundbreaking achievement of the Homelessness Partnership is that it has broadened our policy response. It does not just target one group, say rough sleepers. It targets people, especially women and children who are escaping violence. It targets young people who may be exiting care or institutions, as well as Indigenous Australians. It seeks to prevent homelessness and, failing that, to intervene early and decisively. Two examples of a cooperative policy approach in the last few years are those of HomeGround and FOIA. The HomeGround model originated in New York and has substantially reduced street homelessness. It has helped countless people achieve stable, long-term accommodation in the city. There are now 11 HomeGround facilities across Australia, 7 of which have been funded by the government. The transformative thing about this model is that it helps people to change their lifestyles as a whole. These facilities are more than just a roof over the heads of our most vulnerable Australians. They support clients back into employment, education and the community. Women like Susie. She became homeless at 22 when she fled her violent husband. She lived on the street in cardboard boxes and in rooming houses that offered little safety. Susie found hope in the Elizabeth Street HomeGround in Melbourne. She says, and this goes to the core of why we're all here today, and I quote, "Today everything's different. I'm somebody, I'm a human being. Today I have a hope that I'm able to try and I'm able to do things, and I've never had that before." This hope that Susie speaks of is the result of cooperation between 6 parties: the Australian and Victorian governments, Yarra Community Housing, the Victorian Property Fund, HomeGround Services and Grocon. It is an inspiring example of the White Paper and the National Partnership bringing government, business and the community together to break the cycle of homelessness. It's good news, and it's a quiet and largely unrecognised win. Another innovative model through the Homelessness Partnership is the FOIA. The federal government assists in funding 8 FOIAs across the country. FOIAs integrate supported accommodation with education, training and employment opportunities for young people. The philosophy here is quite simple. Find the strengths of the young person and provide pathways which address issues around homelessness. Education leads to jobs, and a steady job is a big step in maintaining stable accommodation. The imperative of education and dignified employment are narratives as old as the Labor movement. They are our core values. A simple example, the Ladder Street Vincent FOIA project in South Australia brings in Master Chef runner-up Callum Han to give residents some cooking lessons as part of its living program. 15 kids are so inspired that they enrol into the local TAFE to complete certificates in hospitality. That's not a reality TV show. That's just the hard graft of achieving long-term transformational change through meaningful partnerships. FOIAs are a great example of the importance of early intervention in any coordinated response to Australia's homeless challenge. And I'm convinced that the overwhelming proportion of Australians would wish us to cut homelessness by 50% by 2020. So let us engage with each other about the means to get us there, but let us maintain the spirit of cooperation that underlined our partnership on homelessness and the policy successes to date. I say to the federal opposition that there is sufficient evidence of improvement in the lives of our most vulnerable for them to come on board. This area of public policy should be bipartisan. To use the lives of our most fragile citizens to play political football would be breathtaking in its calculated cynicism. When we cooperate, we can achieve great things, and I'm concerned, as I said earlier, that we may be cooperating less. The Victorian and Queensland governments have recently cut tenancy, advocacy and advice services. These services are not a luxury. Keeping people in private rental market is one way to prevent homelessness, and it is an efficient way to prevent homelessness. That's why those services are in the agreement. Any government that does not understand how these services prevent homelessness simply does not get it. So important are these services that I felt compelled to step in to provide emergency funding to keep the Queensland services operating until June next year. The Gillard government will ensure tenancy services are included in any future Commonwealth state agreements and firewalled against the short-sighted, save the pennies, throw away the pounds decision-making that has undermined our efforts to reduce homelessness. So where does that leave us in this, the final year of the National Partnership Agreement on Homelessness? Almost 5 years on, the federal government remains just as committed to the goals and the targets in the white paper. I am pleased today to announce the Commonwealth's intention to approach the states and territories to negotiate a new homelessness partnership based on matched funding and framed by the core principles of prevention, early intervention and breaking the cycle of homelessness. The agreement should improve transparency and ensure we can measure the effectiveness of government action. To provide certainty during these negotiations for the tireless and compassionate workers in this sector, and most importantly for their clients, we commit today to providing our half of the funding for the next financial year while we finalise a longer-term agreement. And today I call upon our state and territory colleagues, those state and territory governments, to immediately match funding for the next financial year and to sit down with the Commonwealth and negotiate a longer-term compact to be resolved next year. This interim agreement won't just roll over the current agreement. I'll be insisting on more specific tenancy advice and support being included. Jurisdictions should not be able to claim that they are meeting the core output of tenancy services while in fact cutting those services. That can never be the foundation to a coordinated and collaborative approach. We need to do more than sustaining the effort so far. We need to refocus our partnerships based on what we have learnt to date. And to this end, I will be asking my state and territory colleagues for better information. It's only through sharing information that we can arrive at a truly evidence-based policy framework. I'll be requesting all jurisdictions to provide evaluations on the successes and failings of the current agreement. In a tight fiscal environment, this must form the basis of any partnership into the future. I understand that these negotiations won't be easy. They should be robust. I look forward to working with the states and territories and the sector to build on what we have learnt to date. There must not be just a new agreement, there must be a better agreement. There must be a better partnership. The cost of inaction to us all is too great. The cost of more people churning through emergency departments, correctional and mental health facilities and other social services far outweighs the costs associated with prevention, early intervention and breaking the cycle measures. The provision of timely and appropriate care and assistance to people who are vulnerable to homelessness is the only way of managing people through homelessness and not merely in homelessness. So let me Let me turn to my central theme, the essence of meaningful partnerships. We differ fundamentally with the Coalition here. We do not dismiss tackling homelessness as simply a state government responsibility. We never have. We've been working with the states over the last 5 years. We see the next period of discussion and negotiation as a great opportunity to build on a national, regional and local response to Brian Burdekin's challenge issued to us a generation ago. This is not the time for negativity as a default decision. We have had 2 decades of economic growth, and our mission, as outlined in the White Paper, is clear. And I'll quote it: "Homelessness is everyone's responsibility. Ending homelessness requires sustained, long-term effort from all levels of government, business, the not-for-profit sector and the community." I think everyone would agree with those sentiments. It would be more than a policy failure. It would be a betrayal of our most vulnerable citizens for all parties not to embark upon the coming negotiations in good faith and in the spirit of collaborative partnerships. We have travelled too far down the road home to falter now. Thank you very much.